What's up guys, it's Lord Botha here with another video, and strap in because we're about to listen to a writer ruin his legacy. This comes from The Gamer. David Gator calls out incels who make fun of Dragon Age The Veilguard's female characters. David Gator, an ironic name, we'll find out why in a few minutes, is responsible for writing on Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, and Dragon Age Inquisition, crafting much of the initial lore and the underpins of the series. Which is half right. He was co-writer on the series. Of course, these games had a team of writers for the series. The writer took to the social media site Blue Sky to chastise Dragon Age The Veilguard's usual detractors who claim the game's female characters are masculine looking. Blue Sky, huh? Yeah, we really wanted to put our voice out there, huh? He says, quote, "The females aren't hot enough." Yet because they're clued into the notion, this is obviously incel behavior. They've swapped out unattractive for masculine and thus transgender because that's a framing that makes them seem political instead of porn-brained, but we all know what they mean. Wow, that's a lot to be said there. Let's break that down just a sec. The females aren't hot enough. No, it's not that the females aren't hot enough. It's the fact that the character models look ugly. Not just the females, but also the males. The male mage character that you introduced in the trailers, right? With the balding hair and mustache and all that. Looks like kind of a classical sorcerer. People were talking pretty extensively about how he looks very bad in the art style choice as well. Yet because they're clued into the notion, this is obviously incel behavior. Ah yes, there's that word, incel. Yet another word that leftists like to use that has lost all meaning. Yes, I guess I'm an incel complaining about this, despite the fact that I'm married, with children. I guess Stuttering Craig over at Side Scrollers is also an incel, despite the fact that he is married, with children. Jeremy over at Geeks and Gamers, who's complained about these sorts of things. He's an incel, despite the fact that he's married, with children. But we're all just sexually frustrated incels, aren't we? They've swapped out unattractive for masculine. Well, guess what? Because the majority of gamers are straight males, we tend to find femininity attractive. So yes, unattractive and masculine in our female characters are equivalent to kind of the same thing. Yes, Gator might not understand this because, well, he's a gay man. So when he sees masculinity, he's into that sort of thing. And thus transgender because that's a framing that makes it seem political. It has nothing to do with politics. Yes, transgender females, because transgender females have, and this is just a scientific fact, more testosterone, which typically make them look more masculine. And we just talked about how straight males, not attracted to masculinity most of the time. And also, this isn't really mostly about actual sexual attractiveness. Though if you're going to include romance in your games like these Dragon Age games do, yes, we're going to try to romance characters that we find attractive. And if the majority of gamers are straight males, we're going to try to romance characters that are female and attractive, which means feminine. And yes, sorry, bangability plays a role in that. Gator references the character of Cassandra from Dragon Age Inquisition, who was the target of similar campaign decade ago. Gator references the character Cassandra from Dragon Age Inquisition, who was the target of a similar campaign a decade ago. Quote, "And here I am recalling how this has been a thing ever since some dude whined 10 years ago about Cassandra actually being a man, posting over and over about her giant jaw and posting phrenology pics to scientifically prove why his PP remained flaccid." Well, first off, you're talking about one guy who was lodging a complaint 10 years ago. Glad to see you're not holding on to it. Glad to see you're not taking the opinions of one guy and applying them to a bunch of people who are critical about your games. Glad to see you have the understanding and openness of mind to realize that that might be a logical fallacy. And yes, guess what? Cassandra did have kind of a manly square jaw. I didn't think she was actually that beautiful of a character in terms of women, right? But there was no denying she still had very strong feminine characteristics with the ways that she was written, the character model that she had in terms of her body, and this applied to pretty much all of the characters in your previous games. So I don't really know exactly what all you're complaining about that much. This is a series, by the way, that turned Flemeth from this character in Dragon Age Origins to a character model that looked like this in Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition. So let's not try to pretend you're above sexualizing characters in your game, David. In a response to a commenter who makes the ludicrous suggestion that because Gator is a gay man, he can't know what an attractive woman looks like, the writer said if it was just a matter of them not finding characters attractive enough, that'd be fine. Well, that pretty much is why, so why the hell are you still complaining? That's not just it, however. They're angry at any game which does not supply them with characters they find specifically attractive, and grasping at reasons why they're being denied. Quite something else. Who's doing that? No one's doing that. Everybody's just complaining that your character models are ugly. What, you're offended that one or two guys 10 years ago made some comments about Cassandra's jawline, and you're still holding on to that? Get over it, man. Get over yourself. Your character models are just ugly. Dragon Age The Veilguard is the latest target in a loosely organized harassment campaign, which is code for it's not organized at all, that ostensibly rallies against diversity and inclusion in video games, but in reality is just sexually frustrated individuals shouting into the void about characters who don't meet their personal attractiveness standards. No, that's what you want it to be. The reality is that people are rallying against diversity and inclusion in video games because it's making character models look ugly. It's also forcing video games to go down certain agendas in terms of their narratives and personal storylines. Gator complains about people forcing him to make his characters look hotter. I complain about the fact that in Dragon Age 2, the game essentially forced you to end up in a relationship with Anders the mage, even if you were a straight male, and to not end up in it with him, you have to essentially break it off at the start, which the game then makes you seem like you're a dick for doing. I remember a liberal friend of mine telling me that her friend felt like an asshole because he's straight, and the game forced him into a relationship with Anders, and he didn't want to break it off with him because he felt like an asshole if he did, but it was the only way to get out of it. So his entire playthrough, he just ended up in an accidental relationship with Anders because the game forced it upon him. But that's all just editorializing the writer has put in here. This Jack Coleman who wrote this article. Probably a sexually frustrated man himself, who doesn't understand that, yes, when there's a romance element in the game, my attraction to characters is going to be one of the driving factors in how much I like the game and that element of the game. And if you don't appeal to the majority audience of the game and what they like, well, you're going to get complaints. While also, he doesn't understand that maybe people aren't complaining about the attractiveness of characters just because of their bangability and how that affects the romance options. Maybe people are complaining just because the character models, male and female, are just ugly. And they just notice the females more because, well, again, straight males are the majority, and they're going to notice the females more often. The writer continues, we've seen several characters targeted, including Kay Vess from Star Wars Outlaws, Aloy from Horizon, and Angela Orozco from Silent Hill 2. Well, first off, Angela and Aloy were made in those games objectively unattractive and kind of fat. And as a man who is fairly unattractive and fat, I can recognize when either a male or a female is unattractive and fat. Guess what I don't want as my main characters in my video games, whether they're male or female? An unattractive fat person. And I think the majority of people are kind of in line with that mindset. If they weren't, there wouldn't be as many complaints, and the games would be selling like gangbusters. Which, by the way, thanks to a few mods, Silent Hill 2 Remake is doing really well. And Aloy, probably for the same reason, is going to get modded to hell in terms of the remake, and it's probably going to sell fairly well. Kay Vess, I don't want to hear anything about Kay Vess. Kay Vess was so uncanny valley level of badly modeled as a character that she didn't even look human, let alone look anything like her character model, who was actually a fairly attractive model. And at the end of the day, for all their complaining, what Gator and this writer Coleman are actually angry about isn't the fact that we are recognizing that character models are ugly, whether they're male or female, or are not attracted to those character models, or are offended that they're more masculine and therefore more transgender looking and we're uncomfortable with transgenderness or whatever. What they're actually mad about is the fact that this game is going to fail. And they're mad at the fact that this is one of the reasons why it's going to fail. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of AAA games coming out right now are failing. But the problem is, it's the wrong thing to get mad over. Because not only are these games failing because of this is like reason number 5 on the list of reasons why these games are failing. You have bad mechanics, a buggy, broken mess release, radically changed, ugly art style, super high development costs, and finally, yes, you have unattractive characters with agenda-filled narratives and storylines that people just don't want to see and don't want to have in their video games. Even if you took the wokeness and DEI out of the game, would this game be more likely to be a success? Maybe. It's still hard to ignore the massive budgets these games have and the ability to get profitability out of them. But I mean, look at Black Myth Wukong. Look at Space Marine. I wouldn't call the character models for those games anything to be sexually attracted to or incredibly beautiful. And it's not like their releases were bug-free, though they were fairly smooth. And the art styles were, pretty true to the IPs or pretty beautiful. And they were able to be pretty dang successful, I'd say. Because if you have good storylines and you don't bombard gamers with agenda, they tend to be a demographic that's fairly forgiving in terms of the media that they consume. But when you infuse that agenda with a whole bunch of other errors on top of it, then those errors get amplified and people end up hating your game. Or at the very worst, they end up apathetic to it. And that's where I'm starting to feel with Dragon Age Veilguard. I've been a Dragon Age fan since the release of Origins. And as we move closer to it, the more and more it's starting to look like the Saints Row reboot. One of my most hated games of all times. Because it ruined a franchise that I loved so much. And I think this might ruin a franchise that I love so much. But those are just my thoughts on this. If you have your own thoughts, go ahead and leave them in the comments. If you like this video, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like this video, appreciate you watching all of it. And we'll talk to you again later.